Is mission mo con extreme, agus toi shom a fi shon de law féle powder gavile a de. Gavwi no hin, dúirt mé in scéal, fui nave powder gay féin. An blin shikata, dúirt mé in scéal fui Children of Lir. An blin seo, scéal éarnach ella gomdid. Scéal fui Oisín agus Tir Na. Mar sin, a raig leis an fi shon, is mission mo con extreme, slán agus beannachtaí na féle powder.
Tir Na, the land of eternal youth, is one of Ireland's many great legends. An island far to the west of Ireland, a place filled with so many magical and wonderful things, among them the gift of eternal youth to all who live there. Fionn na Cúil was the leader of a band of warriors known in ancient Ireland as the Fine, and Fionn had many great legends and tales about himself. Fionn had often heard of Tir Na and longed to find it, but it would be his son, Oisín, a great warrior in his own right, and also a great poet, who would become the person whose name would go hand in hand with Tir Na, as the legends would be written. One day, while out hunting near the shores in the west of Ireland, Fionn, Oisín and the men of the Fine beheld a sight none could believe. It began like a mist over the sea, moving towards the shore. But then, they saw emerging from the mist a white stallion, galloping on the waves, and on its saddle a beautiful, golden-haired maiden. They galloped over to where the men were, and the maiden introduced herself as Niamh Cianóir, Niamh of the golden hair, the daughter of the king of Tir Na. She said that she wished to take one of them back to Tir Na with her, but to Fionn's sadness, it was Oisín who she extended this amazing invitation to. Because for many years she had watched the Fine from the distance of Tir Na and had fallen in love with Oisín. It would have been impossible for any man to refuse the chance to travel to the magical land of legend, and with the invitation coming from such a fair goddess, Oisín immediately accepted and jumped on the horse behind Niamh. He told his father not to be sad at his leaving, and that he would one day return, but Fionn knew that no mortal to ever visit Tir Na would ever be able to return to Ireland. The horse turned and galloped back towards the sea and along the waves. A mist began to envelop them, and as Fionn and the Fine watched from the shore, the horse and couple vanished over the horizon. Oisín was amazed as they rode over the water, but surprisingly quickly they reached land again, and they had arrived in Tir Na. Niamh brought Oisín to meet her father, the king of Tir Na, and not long after, the pair were married. There in Tir Na they lived a wonderful life, where fruit and crops were always abundant, beautiful music could always be heard. They lived in luxury, with nothing to do but enjoy the splendour of this wondrous land, singing, dancing, and loving each other. If this were a fairy tale, this would be the happily ever after moment. But this, sadly, is no fairy tale. 3 years had passed, and while Oisín was happy with his new family, he began to long to see his home of Ireland once again. In his sleep he would dream he was back home with his father and friends, hunting the deer in the forests, or taking part in battle. He realised though things were perfect in Tir Na, he was left longing for the rugged, adventurous life he led back in Ireland. At first, Niamh was reluctant to allow him to visit Ireland, but Oisín promised it would only be a visit, just to see his father, and then he would return to her. Her love for Oisín was so strong, however, and she could not refuse him. She called forth the same horse that brought them to Tir Na 3 years previous, fully saddled, and Oisín climbed onto it. Leaning down to kiss Niamh, she whispered to him a warning that when he reached Ireland, he was to never set foot on Irish soil. Oisín did not understand why, but agreed, and promised to his wife he would remain on the horse for the whole of the journey. He rode off onto the seas and across the waves, and as Tir Na Nog vanished behind him, he soon saw the great cliffs of the western shore of Ireland with its lush green fields above. Oisín was delighted, until he reached the land and rode towards his father's home. He began to notice that Ireland was no longer as he remembered. The people he saw were small compared to the great men of the Fenia, and wore strange clothing. There were fewer forests and many new towns that were not there when he had first departed. When he finally reached the place where the Fenia's fortress stood, he found nothing but moss-covered ruins. He called out loudly for Fionn and his friends, but there was no reply. Confused, he rode on further and came across a field where he saw 3 men trying in vain to move a large boulder. He approached them and asked them if he knew where Fionn and the Fenia were. The men laughed, thinking that this stranger was a madman. The Fenia are only heard of in stories and legends. Why, even if they were real, that would have been over 300 years ago, one of them replied. Oisín's heart sank into sorrow at the realization that time on Tir Na Nog passed much slower than in Ireland, that his 3 years there were 300 in his homeland, and all his friends and family were long gone. Oisín told the men that the Fenia were real, and that he was the son of Fionn McCool, and that any one man of the Fenia could remove their boulder with but one hand. Again, the 3 men laughed at him, but Oisín leaned down, grabbed the boulder, and with one hand flung it into the next field. The 3 men were dumbfounded, but then something far more shocking happened. The saddle strap on Oisín's horse broke, and Oisín fell to the ground. As soon as his feet touched the soil, all of his lost years came onto him, and he quickly aged from a young warrior into an old, withered man. He knew then why Niamh had asked him to remain on the horse, but it was far too late. And there, Oisín, last of the Fenia, died, much to Niamh's sorrow, as she knew he would never return to Tir Na Nog. In some stories, they say that Fionn and the Fenia never actually died, but they had hidden themselves away in a magical cave, from which they would one day emerge in force when Ireland badly needed great men. Some people would say that perhaps they're a little overdue.